So 2025 is now over, and yet the horrors persist. And by horrors, I of course mean the stack of books still on the floor of my library after 2 years of Shelve It or Scrap It, the vlog project where I try and get these stacks of books onto my shelves or scrapped into my unhaul pile. The good news is that I've actually made progress this year, and so we only have 42 books left in the stacks, which is 29 books less than at the start of 2025. But I've now decided that this stack is our final boss of Shelve It or Scrap It, and to beat it by the end of the year, each month I'm going to divide the amount of books in stacks by the amount of months left of the year to determine how many books I'm going to have to remove from the stacks per episode, so that hopefully by the end of 2026, every book in the stacks will either find a home on my shelves or be headed into my scrap pile. In episode 24, I shelved 2 books and I scrapped 2, and we are going to be starting episode 25 with 32 books in the stacks. Hello my guys, welcome to episode 25 of Shelve It or Scrap It, the vlog series on my channel where I try and get these stacks of books behind me off the floor of my library through any means possible, usually through a process of reading them and deciding whether I'm going to be shelving them or scrapping them. Now, if this is your first episode of Shelve It or Scrap It that you are coming across, I have the entire playlist linked down below in my description box in case you want to go back and binge the entire thing. But I am very excited about today's episode because we are going back to basics and we are going to be using a random number generator to select the books that I'm going to be reading. I have missed the spontaneity of Shelve It or Scrap It. I do like doing a fun theme because then I get to hone in on areas of my book collection that I've maybe been neglecting or I never particularly reach for. But I do miss the spontaneity of just not knowing what I'm going to be reading next. I feel like that actually spurs me to read faster because I'm eager to find out what the next book I'm going to be reading is. So I'm definitely wanting to harness that energy in this video. Now, in the stacks behind me, we have 32 books to start off this episode, which I think is just one more than we had at the end of last episode. I've also done a little bit of rearranging. I've moved some stuff around on shelves, so the 32 books in here are not necessarily the exact same ones that we had at the end of episode 24. And I will admit I put Kissed by the Gods by Katie Rogan in here because it's an upcoming arc that I have that I'm really, really eager to read. So I would love it if it came up in this episode. But as per the rules of 2026, we will be dividing the amount of books in the stacks by the amount of months left in the year. And that is how many books we will be trying to read. So at present, we have 32 books, including the month of May. There are 8 months left of the year. And so in this episode, we will be aiming to remove 4 books from the stacks total. Now, I do have my random number generator locked and loaded and raring to go, but I thought it would be fun if I told you 4 books from the stacks that I really want to read to see if we can manifest any of them. So one, of course, is Kissed by the Gods by Katie Rogan. She's right here. This is an upcoming romantasy release that I've heard has really good epic fantasy vibes and a kind of unique or very strong like magic system and world building, which, you know, sounds great to me. I also have a bunch of sequels in here. And I'll be honest, you know, sometimes I just sit in my office and I play with my random number generator, and I do often get a sequel coming up. So I would love it if I could hit at least one of those series this episode. I do think that that is actually quite likely. I also have in here Anathema by Kerry Lake. I've heard amazing things about this. When I hold this, I put it in the stacks because I want to read it as soon as possible. Gothic, romantasy, spooky elements. I want to know what the hype is about. And for the last one, I'm thinking something maybe like Half City by Kate Golden, because I'm hearing amazing things about that right now. So I definitely need to check that one out. But I also have a couple of other hyped things, like When the Moon Hatched, the sequel was just released, and like Metal Singer by Rachel Snyder is pretty buzzy. So lots of really good options that could come up during episode 25. So my number generator is here. She's ready, and I'm so eager to get started. So let's figure out what my first book of this video is going to be. Number 32. I'm actually really mad because the last book in the stacks was, I'm being very careful not to look what it is right now, but it was this graphic novel because it's the biggest book, so it was support in the bottom, but I got that out for some reason. Oh, it was for the book haul that I just posted, and then I couldn't be bothered putting it back on the bottom. That would have been such an easy book to start this one off, but oh I mean, that's fine, I guess. So at the bottom of the stacks in the number 32 slot, we have This Vicious Grace by Emily Thaidi. And, you know, I was a little bit disappointed by this, not because I don't find this interesting. This is just a fairy loot book from a few years ago, which did sound interesting when I hauled it, but it has lingered on my shelves for a long time. So kind of the motivation to pick it up isn't really there. This one is it an adult book? I thought that it was, but it might actually be YA. It is from the YA box in June 2022. Okay, so our main character has a gift from the gods that's supposed to magnify a partner's magic, but it actually kills every suitor that she touches, and there's only weeks left until a swarm of demons devours everything on her island home. But a powerful priest convinces his faithful flock that killing the main character is the island's only hope, and so even her own soldiers try to assassinate her. So then she hires Dante, who is a cynical outcast marked as a killer, to become her personal bodyguard, and I think we know how that goes. So I haven't really heard anything about this. I am still, especially based on that synopsis, actually I'm more enthusiastic than I was literally 1 minute ago. So let's see how this one plays out. I will say this will be my first young adult of this year. I think I've DNF'd one young adult that I tried to read, which was Coldwire by Chloe Gong, I think, for the last episode. But if I make it through this one and finish it, this will be my first young adult of the year, which is wild, actually. We are having some glorious weather in the UK right now, and trust me when I say I am absolutely not mad about it. So this morning I set myself up in the garden, I went out, I got Kami a paddling pool, and we have been hanging out in the shade together. She's been having a whale of a time, bobbing for ice cubes and balls, and I have been reading my book, and I've made it through a significant chunk of this now. I'm on page 165, and I'm actually really enjoying this one. I feel like I haven't really heard anyone talk about it, but I did check out the average rating on Goodreads just to give me an idea, and it's actually pretty high. It's around 4, which ain't too bad. So this one actually reminds me a lot of Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry, which is interesting, only really in the premise, because our main character in this world, this is a world that I believe is inspired by Italy. We have a lot of things like limoncello in here. There's also little bits of Italian, which they're calling the ancient language. I haven't run it through a translator to confirm that it is like modern Italian, but it does look like Italian to me. And our main character is something called the Fenestra, which I believe means window. She is the window to the gods. Also a little bit like from Blood and Ash, actually, because she is somebody who has been chosen to be the person who defeats the demons that will be invading this land. I'm assuming it's like an every generation kind of thing, like with Shield of Sparrows. I'm not sure whether it is a set amount of years, but no matter what that time span is, every time this is about to happen, there is a Fenestra chosen, and they are part of a pair. They are supposed to team up with somebody else. I think they're called Fortes. They have magical gifts, and the power of the Fenestra is to amplify those magical gifts through touch. So because this is a religious world, because we deal with the gods in here, it is something that has a lot of ceremony around it. And so the Fenestra and the Forte are married, and then they start to hone their abilities together in preparation to defeat this demon horde. However, something is apparently wrong with our main character, because she keeps killing her Forte. She's been through 3 at the beginning of this book. She is burying the 3rd, and she is getting increasingly more anxious about this, because obviously this invasion is approaching and they're all going to die. Like, the whole world is going to die. She is the person who is supposed to stand between this demon horde and the rest of the world. And I'm pretty sure, once again, like with Shield of Sparrows, this is something where these demons will come, they will kind of decimate the land, a lot of people will be killed, they open up the fortress and they let children in, but a lot of people will be left to fend for themselves. They're anticipating like buildings being destroyed, resources harder to come by. Because she keeps killing her Fortes, she's getting more and more anxious. The people of this world are getting more and more anxious. And this priest has risen up. He's gaining quite a lot of traction. And he believes that the only way to stop this demon horde, given the present state of our current Fenestra, is to kill her. So one night, one of her guards actually attempts to kill her. And she, at this point, is at her wit's end. She's like, I want to perform my duty. I don't know how to do it. But now I'm not even safe in my own room. Like, my guards aren't even protecting me. So she goes out into the city and she finds a fighter in this like underground fighting ring, and she pays him to become her bodyguard. Now, my assumption because I'm pretty sure this is going to go down a romance route. My assumption is that they are going to fall in love, and also that he is going to somehow become her forte. He does have some mystery around him, like we don't know his name, he won't talk about his parents, so there is a chance that he does have this magical ability, which she will then be able to amplify, but I don't know whether it's going to be more just because they're connected as opposed to him having a magical ability, or whether he does have something that he is concealing. But I'm enjoying this. This is given nostalgic romantasy to me. This is like the kind of book that I would pick up and love in 2015 through 2020. You know, like a strong young adult fantasy with a romantic presence. I'm feeling like akin to Throne of Glass. And obviously, you know, for those of you who've read Throne of Glass, for those of you like me who love Throne of Glass, that is a pretty high endorsement. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is as good as Throne of Glass, but it has reminded me of fantasy of that ilk. You know, the thing that we were kind of searching for back in the day, the thing that we could not stop eating up. And I still fuck with this now, you know. This is still my jam. Like, I would still rather read this style of fantasy with a very strong romantic presence than really smut forward. I don't want to say more modern romantasy because this is hardly old. It's like 3 years old, but in style, more modern romantasy. When I originally in 2020 said I love fantasy romance, I want to find more of it, it was more along these lines that I was looking for, which, you know, obviously does still exist out there. And there's a ton of older series that I also haven't read yet. It's more kind of like hunting it down when everything has the same genre label on it. And it's like, okay, but what style are we going for? And I mean, that's the same across every genre. When you go into fantasy and it's just labeled fantasy, you don't really know what you're getting. But this is a gem. Like, I was obviously not super enthusiastic about this. Like I said, it sounded interesting. And so far, having a really good time. And I'm eager to get back outside and read some more of this. So we have been out pretty much all bank holiday weekend, and somewhere along the way I've contracted a little bit of a throat infection, so apologies if you could hear that, but I have been lubricating my throat with a nice iced coffee and reading a little bit in the garden this morning. But it is time for an update because I am just shy of 80% of the way through this Vicious Grace. I'm somewhere between 75 and 80%, and I was eating this up last night. This book feels so nostalgic to me, and I am loving it. I'm really excited to finish it out and see where it ends. I think it's the first book in a duology. I know there's 2 books out. I don't know if, I'm assuming that that's it and it was an intended duology. That does worry me a little bit though, because the second book in a duology often doesn't hit for me. I often find it rushed, and I'm enjoying this one so much that I really hope that that's not the case. But at this point, I definitely plan on continuing on. I do have a couple of small criticisms of it though. I think that the world building could be a little bit more developed. We get thrown into this world and there's a lot of terminology thrown around that isn't explained, which is fine because you can kind of pick that up within the context of what is going on around us in this world. But there are a bunch of characters that are introduced, a bunch of the potential Fontes with all of these abilities. And I feel like in books of this nature, we tend to really sit in this period of the book because it's not a series of trials, but it is a situation where there are a number of them and they are going to be narrowed down to one. Now, it's not necessarily about their performance, which is why it's not a series of trials, but in books like this, we typically get to see each of their individual powers. Just fleshes out the world a little bit, you know, because you can see the scope, like the range of the type of powers that we may have in this world. It gives you a better understanding of the magic, but I do feel like that portion of the book was really quite glossed over. And so we have a bunch of these characters. They're not as relevant to the plot where I'm up to right now, but they are still a part of the story, and I don't imagine we've seen the last of them. And I couldn't tell you which one has which power. So while this book has really captivated me, I'm reading it really quickly, I'm having a really good time. There are aspects of the world where when I sit and think about them, I realize that I don't have a good picture of what's going on. I could swear there was royalty in this world, and that the Fenestra, she has like the status of a princess almost, and I don't know whether it was just me kind of filling in the blanks, but I thought that she kind of worked alongside a royal family as a champion for this country, like when this demon invasion strikes. But now I'm like almost at the end and we haven't mentioned any royal family, so I think that the people at the top of this world are like the Fenestra, but then she also has the people who came before her, like the people who fought off the last demon invasion are the people who are training her. So they're like a little bit above her. There's also a committee or a council that make decisions, but we actually haven't really seen any of those. And then there's the army and like the captain within the army. And I think that that's kind of it. But I once again would have appreciated a little bit more world building in terms of like explanations of how exactly this country is run, the history of the world, the potential source of the demon invasion. And these kind of elements are the things that are missing for me, and I think are hindering my immersion just a little bit. Now, I'm obviously enjoying this enough. I'm having a really good time with it. I do really like the romance that we have in here. Once again, feels very, very nostalgic to me. And I feel like the author is doing a good job of having really high stakes, because the person that she's drawn to is not the person she should be drawn to, given that she has this kind of like holy position. But then also we have the impending doom of the demon invasion. And at the start of every chapter, it gives you a countdown of how many days it is, because they have like with Shield of Sparrows, again, they have a warning signal, which is where like the first demon is found, and from then they know kind of when the demon invasion is coming. And so you have the countdown as the main character is getting more and more harried, knowing that she should be prepared for this, she should have a forte, and her powers are malfunctioning and she can't touch people without killing them. And then you also have high stakes within the romance, because it's a little bit of a forbidden romance. So I feel like the author is managing all of that well. I find it compelling. I am really interested in this world. I just would appreciate a little bit more fleshing out, and I appreciate that there are people out there who want to get straight to the action. I definitely want to kind of immerse myself in the world, and really just to satisfy my own curiosity, I want to know for sure all of the different elements of the world building, instead of kind of having to come to my own conclusions based on context clues, you know? Like, I can make an assumption about things, but I want the author to confirm that when it comes to the world building. The plot, allow me to make my own assumptions, please, but world building, give me all the details. So I finished this Vicious Grace and I actually really liked it. I gave this one a low 4-star rating. I really liked the romantic relationship in here, and I really liked the weight of the plot versus the weight of the romance, and the way that the author balanced that. It was very much in line with my particular tastes, where I would say it's almost a 50-50 split, because the plot in here is very important, but the romantic relationship is a driving force when it comes to our main character and the decisions that she makes, and therefore it influences the plot quite heavily, even though the plot in itself is kind of independent of the relationship. I also really liked the premise of this, and also the world. My one critique, though, as I've mentioned, is that I would have liked that world to be better fleshed out. I liked how everything came together. I liked the way that the main characters kind of solved the problems that they were dealing with throughout the course of this, and how that contributed to the final climax of this novel. But there are two things that I did not love about the end of this one. The first is that it used a trope that I'm really bored of seeing, especially in romantic fantasy romance. It's so common and it's so frustrating, and it feeds into a few arguments or critiques that I've had of the genre of a whole recently that I've been discussing in various vlogs. And the other thing is that the plot of the sequel to this kind of felt shoehorned in. It's essentially pursuing the solution of a problem we didn't even know existed until the very end of this book. And it's not like a problem that we kind of encountered in the heat of battle, like, oh no, this isn't going the way that we thought it would, or things aren't exactly as they seem. The way that it was framed, it was almost like a problem for the characters as opposed to a problem for the world. Like, by pursuing this and solving this problem, it is going to be beneficial for the world, but it didn't feel like an organic extension of the plot. It very much felt like oh, by the way, I need to mention this thing so that you'll pick up the second book in this series. So regarding the second book in that series and whether I'm going to be continuing, I was so confident that I wanted to pursue the sequel to this up until the last 20% of this book that I read. And I think I'm a little salty because of that trope, and also the fact that the extension into the sequel doesn't feel organic. So now I am a little bit unsure of what I want to do with this series. I have checked and the sequel is available on Libby, so that is always an option. But my kind of gut feeling as I was getting through the end portions of this book is that I really enjoyed this book. not necessarily enough to own a hardback copy of it, because something that I've realized recently is, and I kind of knew this, so my issue, obviously, when we look at the stacks, 95% of the books that we have in there are hardback. That is where my issue lies, because of the specific shapes of my shelves. I don't have as much space for hardbacks. And I mean, generally they just take up more space. So realistically, you can shelve more paperbacks than hardbacks in an allocated space anyway. But something that I didn't really realize until maybe the last few months is that as I am unhauling books as I'm reading them, whether that be organically or through Shelve It or Scrap It, I'm unhauling paperbacks, not like en masse or anything, but paperbacks are being unhauled if I read them and I don't want to keep them. But I'm not replacing them. I'm only hauling hardbacks pretty much, with a handful of exceptions. And so what that means is that looking at my paperback shelves right now, there's a few gaps in there and my hardback shelves are overflowing. So I've been thinking about potentially replacing some of the series that I do enjoy and I do want to keep, but I don't need in hardback, with paperbacks of, do you know, like older completed things now, and then only keeping hardbacks of things that are like strong 4 or 5 star series to me. Like the majority of the books that I have on here now, I've read. We have very limited space for new books on there because a lot of these are series as well, which just leaves me with that one shelf upstairs, which as we're starting to shelve books that I've read on it, I'm realizing that I am running out of space for hardbacks rapidly. So my original plan with this was to maybe unhaul this copy, because while I really enjoyed this book and I wouldn't mind having a copy of it, this is just the normal UK cover in a different colorway. And it's not like it's pretty, but it's not blowing my mind, you know, like I don't have to have it. And I was going to get a paperback bundle of the 2 books in the duology from Vinted. However, I can't find one. I can only find hardbacks. There's a couple of like the first book floating around really inexpensively. It's the second book that I can't find in paperback and in good condition. And ironically, I could actually buy both of the Fairy Loot editions for the same price as a new paperback on Vinted. So I don't really know what I'm going to do, but I do think that I'm going to scrap this. I may order, I found a £2 copy on Vinted of book 1, so I might order that and then keep an eye out for book 2 in the future, because this is obviously, sadly, because I really enjoyed it, it's obviously a series that people don't really want to hold on to, but that does mean that at some point in the future I should be able to stumble across the sequel, or alternatively I can read it on Libby and then decide if I want to purchase a copy later on. My only issue with doing that though, because I read so much on my Kindle now any days, like you guys know, even with this book I borrowed a copy off Libby to read it on my Kindle instead of holding a hardback, because it's just easier, more convenient. The only problem is that because I obviously have a lot of books I haven't read, I never prioritize books that I have out on KU, that I only have e-copies of, or that I'm borrowing on Libby. I tend to only borrow things from Libby if it's a duplicate of something I own and I just want to read it on my Kindle. And I don't really know how to get around that mentally, because every time I think like, oh, I'll just do a reading vlog and I'll just read ebooks. And it's like, okay, but I have so many books here that I haven't read. So that means, kind of unexpectedly, because I really did for the longest time, I think I was going to shelve this one, that we are going to be heading back to the stacks to pick my next read. So myself and my trusty Google random number generator are ready to go. So let's see what the second book for this video is going to be. 9. Ooh, what's number 9? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So excited. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh man, I counted correctly. Yes. So the number generator has spoken and it has done me a solid. And I'm going to be reading Human Rights by Juno Dawson, which is the final book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. I can end this video happy now because I got one of my wishes. This is one of the sequels that was in the stacks. It is like, there's a 95% chance that this is going to be a shelf though, which I'll be honest, that does worry me a little bit, because there's not a lot of room on those shelves, as we just discussed, especially at the top. So we're going to have an issue on our hands when I finish this book. But until then, it's all fun and games. Let me tell you about this series if you have not heard of it. It's set in the north of England, which is probably about 70% of the reason why I love it. And we are following a group of witches. I think I want to say they're in their mid to late 30s, but they all came from the same town. They were all young witches and they formed a coven. So when they were in their 20s, there was a war between the witches and the warlock, and they all have some sort of trauma based on the events of that war. Now, like I said, they're a little bit older and they're spread around the country. So one of them is the High Priestess of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which is the governing body of witches in this world. One of them lives down in London, where I think does she lead her own coven? And two of them are still in the town that they grew up in. So one of them I would say is our dominant main character, and she is a vet. She uses her magic and her affinity for animals to help her to heal them, because she can kind of sense what's going on with them. And the other one has kind of not given up her witchcraft, but she's definitely in her motherhood era, where she is essentially not really pursuing being a witch, and she's happily married and she's raising, I think, 2 children. And in this world there is a prophecy. The prophecy states that there is going to be a sullied child, and the sullied child is going to summon a demon that is going to bring about the end of days. And the woman who is the High Priestess of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, who I think is called Helena or Helena, gets in touch with her childhood friend Neve. Thanks for all coming running. What was it? Spider on my leg. Oh, I thought you were filming a video. Yeah, I was. Apologies for that brief intermission. This room is above the cellar, and there's a particular type of spider called a cellar spider. And we have quite a few of them. Luckily, they're quite small and spindly. Anyway, where was I? The woman who is the High Priestess of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, who I think is called Helena, gets in touch with her childhood friend Neve and asks her to rehabilitate a child that they believe is the sullied child from the prophecy. And this child is very temperamental. They are prone to lashing out. They have immense power. And they're also very closed off and not willing to communicate with anybody. So Neve takes this child under her wing and tries to help them deal with their trauma to try and subvert this sullied child prophecy. So this one is the third and final book in the trilogy. It was one of my most anticipated releases of last year, and I was actually really annoyed that I didn't manage to get to it, because it is one of the rare series that I've actually managed to keep on track of as it's been released up until we got to this final installment. It's quite a short one, which worries me, and I do think I'm going to have to read a little bit of a recap, because I do like to reread books normally in preparations for sequels being released, and I've kind of had to let go of that in a lot of cases over the last few years. So I feel like I really strongly remember book 1. I'm struggling to remember where book 2 left off, so I think I'm going to try and find a recap, or at least something that's going to remind me of the end notes. Oh, I think I remember. All of these books end on a cliffhanger, so it's really annoying that there was a prequel published in between book 2 and book 3 in this one, but I actually think I remember where we left off, and I'm so excited to dive back into this one. I did manage to find a couple of pretty good recaps for book 1 and 2 actually. I will link them down below. I'm pretty sure that it's the same place that I got my recap of book 1 before I went into book 2 a couple of years ago, and it's really helpful because it breaks down pretty much everything important in the book into bullet points, so it's really easy to digest before picking up the next book in the series. I will say that this series is pretty insane when you break it down into a list of bullet points. I was definitely right in looking up those recaps, because there was a couple of things that happened in book 2 that when I reread them in the recap, I was honestly shocked. But I went into book 3 adequately prepared, and I'm having a good time with this one. I'm 160 pages into it now. Something that I always forget about Juno Dawson is how easily readable her books are. I also forgot how funny this series can be. Once again, for me, that is typically provided through the dialogue between our characters, who are all once again from the north of England. A little subgenre of fantasy that I also really enjoy is contemporary fantasy that has a witchcraft or occult element, and this is that to a T. I always talk about that specific subgenre in the YA space, and that is one subgenre of young adult fantasy that I still really love. But if you are somebody who also loves that, this series for me is definitely one that delivers those vibes within an adult novel. I also really love that this has a lot of societal commentary in it. It is very diverse, but very naturally diverse, and highlights unfairness directed towards marginalized communities without it detracting away from the fact that this is still a fantasy book with a fantasy plotline. So I'm really happy to be back in this world, and I'm glad that I'm having a really good time with it. I am struggling a little bit. It is taking me a while, mainly because I've been immersion reading so much recently. I've mentioned it. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it in this vlog, but I have mentioned it in the last vlog I did, because my attention span can be a little all over the place. My brain can be a cluttered space, and I find that immersion reading keeps me on track and stops me from putting my book down and picking my phone up. And I have been trying not to do that with this, just because it's the third book in a series where I haven't listened to the audiobooks of any of the previous books. So I want to kind of retain the tone that I've been reading the book with, as opposed to replacing that with the tone of the audiobook narrator. Something that I also really love about Juno Dawson that I'm also finding very apparent in this book is that Juno Dawson is a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, which I did know because I can't remember exactly the level of Juno Dawson's involvement, but a couple of years ago now, I think, Audible released an Audible exclusive Buffy story. It was a full cast audiobook with the original cast reading their characters' parts for the audio. And I think that Juno Dawson was featured as a voice on that, if I remember correctly. But without going into spoilers, I mean, I can see Buffy throughout this entire thing, and I always have been able to. There's elements of this book that deal in necromancy, but there was a resurrection scene in here that reminded me a lot of season 6 of Buffy. So as a Buffy fan, that was really nice to see. And because Juno Dawson grew up in a very similar part of the UK to me, and also I think is probably just a few years older than me, there are tons of references to things that I was familiar with growing up that I really love to see in this series as well. There's a ton of Spice Girls references throughout this series, and I did notice when I was seeing how long this book is that I'm pretty sure the last chapter is called Viva Forever, which is a Spice Girls song. And actually, speaking of the length of this book, it is longer than I thought it was. I feel like it looks quite small, but it is very, very close to 500 pages. It's around 490, which I'm glad about, because that's something that I really don't like is when these sequels in a fantasy series are shorter than the books that came before it. Because if I'm committing to a series as well, I want more content. Like, I want each book in the series to be giving me more of this world that I love. So not too much to report, because this is like the third book in a series. If you're a fan of this series, it's still very much in line with the first two books. Also, for UK binding, this one is surprisingly floppy. Like, it's not stiff and it's staying open, which I'm really appreciative of, but it's also something that I'm not especially used to. So far, so good. Having a good time. I'm hoping to get through another chunk of this tonight. I feel like now that I've reacquainted myself with the series, the world, the characters, I feel like I'm a little bit more able to lock into it now. So hopefully distraction won't be so much of an issue throughout the rest of this book for me. And I know this is a me problem, very much not a book problem. I'm battling my own brain 24/7, and I'm trying to not let that impact my enjoyment of a series that I really like. Something that I really appreciate about this series is that it follows older characters, not only because I'm closer to the age of these characters now, I guess in the late 30s. I'm not sure if they are in their 40s or whether they're late 30s, but I'm closer to my late 30s than I am to my early 20s. And the typical protagonist of a lot of very popular fantasy books are like 20 to 25. So I guess I have more in common with these women than I do the protagonists of a lot of other books. But that is not the reason why I appreciate that these guys are older. I think it's because I generally read a lot of romantasy where we have the overarching themes of like love conquers all, which is a beautiful sentiment. And I also think that we're going to end up going along that route in this series, although it's not going to be a romantic love that conquers all. It's more going to be familial, sisterly kind of love. But in stories of that nature where we're going for this like overarching love story, you can have some conveniences, some less realistic moments. I'm thinking things like the resurrection trope, which is more common than I would like. But I feel like having older, more experienced characters in Her Majesty's Royal Coven means that we have more realistic relationships. Like our main, or one of our main characters, because this is about all of the women in the Coven, as well as some of the younger characters, like their children and the Sullied child character that we follow. But Neve, who I feel like is the dominant character we follow in book one, but then we like continue to broaden the scope to include all of the women a little bit more equally. But Neve lost her fiance during the war between witches and warlocks, and that is something that we know about her straight from the beginning pretty much of this series. And at this point it's been like 10 years since that war, but she's never really recovered from it. The manner of his death was quite traumatic and she has felt the loss of him for a really long time. But part of the narrative of this series is that she meets someone and it doesn't lessen the pain that she feels for losing her fiance. It doesn't change the fact that that is something that is going to live with her forever. And I feel like by following characters that have a little bit more life experience, we also get the benefit of a little bit more complexity of character, because everything that happens to you in your life, especially the bad stuff, like it stays with you. And even though you can have a fresh start, even though you can move on, you are the person that you are because of everything that has come before it, like the good and the bad. And obviously when we're following younger characters, that's still true. It's still true of children, teenagers, younger adults. But obviously the older you get, the more stuff that you have in your past that becomes a building block of who you are. And I really love a lot of the complex relationships and kind of complex outcomes to scenarios within this series that we have, given that our characters are a little bit older, that they've had 10, 15 more years of life than the typical protagonist that I read about. And there's actually a moment in here that almost made me cry because of that. And y'all know I love something that makes me cry. If it impacts me emotionally, then I am here. Juno Dawson is really wearing her Buffy influences on her sleeve in this one. And I mean, I'm wearing them on my chest today, so I can't blame the girl for being a fan. But not only do we have some of the references and homages to Buffy that I've like mentioned earlier in this vlog, she's also directly mentioned Buffy as a chosen one figure twice just throughout the course of this book. And when I was talking about the events of this book that seem crazy when you list them all side by side, I think that Juno Dawson trying to channel a story that is similar in tone to something like Buffy contributes to the craziness of the events of this book. We're also dealing with the occult here, the paranormal, and we have quite a few spontaneous occurrences that pop up that seem wild. Like there's something going on in this book that I did not foresee happening. Apparently, based on where I am in the book now, which is 350 pages, I've got about 150 pages to go of this one. Yeah, I'm bang on page 350. And it has hinted that some of the reveals that we're getting in this book are ones that Juno Dawson started introducing in book 2. I would obviously have to reread to see if it kind of gives anything away. I didn't notice anything at the time, and these things have been taking me by surprise, but I feel like things coming out of the blue without any kind of groundwork laid are things that can irritate me in fantasy. Like I want to see the foreshadowing. I want everything that happens to be probable and plausible given the hints that we've had in the text before. But I feel like this works for me so much because they fit so well within the atmosphere of this story, because it's so obvious that Juno Dawson is trying to channel this 90s Buffy Charmed-esque supernatural paranormal story that has a lot of humor and a lot of wit in it, but also a lot of heart. And I will say that while I mentioned the dreaded word for me there in fantasy, humor, this is more serious than it is funny, but we do have a lot of like witty banter or witty one-liners, especially when our characters are faced with some of these more out-of-pocket events in this series, because this is weird for them. It's not only crazy in the concept of like the scope of things that could generally possibly happen, it's also crazy to them. And I think also when you put the timeline of this book into perspective, which I can't remember exactly how long it is, I think, is it like over the course of a year or something like that? Like, these women, they've been through some stuff. Some stuff has happened to them. And the way that they're kind of not necessarily taking it all in their stride, but they're dealing with it as it comes and using humor to cope with it, I'm also really enjoying. And I find all of that like really akin to things like Buffy as well. So last night I finished Human Rights by Juno Dawson, and I loved the way that this series wrapped up. I did shed a couple of tears at the end there, but honestly I was holding back tears for the last 50 to 60 pages of this. I would describe the overall tone of the end of this as bittersweet, and the reason why I was getting so emotional was not because we had complete devastation, as we can have in some fantasy series, but because there were some moments, I mean, there were some like big, poignant, dramatic, devastating moments throughout the close of this. There were so many heartfelt moments and so many positive moments that were still kind of laced with the consequences of this entire plot line unfolding. There are characters in here that are villains, that are misguided, that are bigoted, that we are not supposed to like, but we still feel the impact of those characters on our main characters' emotions and lives. These women are who they are because of everything that has happened to them their entire lives. And we have flashbacks in this series where we go back to their childhoods. We also see little bits and pieces around this war that really shaped who they are and left all of them with some degree of trauma. And then we also see how all of those experiences have left a mark on them and influenced the people that they are today. And I think that is something that I was trying to get across in the last clip. It's that these women are so complex and so layered. There are so many things that kind of go into building their character that I really feel comes across. It feels three-dimensional. They feel like real people who have had really difficult experiences in their life. And I think that that really carries through to the way that this book concludes each of their story arcs. They are resilient women. Yes, a lot of bad stuff has happened and they're going to carry the negative events of this book, like the events of this series, with them on top of all of the other things that they also carry, but they're also going to be okay. And I think as somebody, I mean, we've all struggled. I'm not saying I'm a special snowflake in that there has been difficult things that have happened in my life, but I think that that is a message that just resonates with me so much, given that I have struggled with certain events in my life and mental health over the last decade. And I think trying to reconcile the fact that all of these things have happened and that there's nothing that I can do to change them, there's nothing I can do to erase them or make them better or make it as though it never happened. But ultimately, I am still going to be okay. And I feel like seeing that represented in this book, given that I'm doing so much better than I have been in the past, but I by no means am doing amazingly every single day. I still have very difficult days. I still have very difficult moments. And seeing that represented in here was almost healing for me in some regard, because I feel like, especially with the prevalence of social media in society, and even predating social media, when we talk about just media in general, there is always this pressure to be doing well, to be doing good, to be successful, to be happy, to be healthy. And it's not really, that level of perfection is not a realistic goal. So to see characters who are moving on with their lives, having a positive outlook on their lives, even though it's not perfect, even though they still have all of this stuff that has happened to them that they have to deal with and make peace with, I really, really appreciated in this one. I ended up rating this one 4 stars. It's really interesting because when I think back on this series, there's not a ton of series where I look back on them and I'm like, I had such an amazing time with that book. I loved so many things about it. And the majority of the series that I do think on that way, I tend to give 5 stars to. This is a solidly 4-star series for me. I do think that this is a series that I would reread in the future though. And I do think that I would maybe gain a extra level of appreciation for this upon reread. I can't even tell you why this series is not 5 stars. I have said this before, but 5 stars is a feeling. Like, I know if a book is a 5-star or if it isn't. And while I hold this series in such high regard, there is just something that makes me feel that it's not 5 stars. And you know what? That could be something that we've already talked about in this vlog, how I love every event of the books that I read, especially in fantasy, to be well grounded in the world and to have precedent and to see foreshadowing. And there's a ton of out of pocket stuff that happens in here, which is definitely plausible within the world, but does also kind of come out of nowhere. But regardless of the rating, I would definitely recommend that you pick this one up. I know I've seen a bunch of people struggle with it because of the language in here, because it is so northern in its core. It's not just the language, it's the characters, it is the way that they react to situations. Like, I feel the northernness of this series like in my very soul. And I know that a lot of people who do not have the tie to the north that I have, or even the UK, have struggled with that a little bit. But I do think if you're a fan of those contemporary stories with a little bit of the occult nature, and this is about as occult as it gets, if you're a fan of TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like Charmed, if you haven't picked this up yet, but maybe you are from Northern England, then I would definitely recommend this for you. And I'm so excited to see what Juno Dawson comes up with in the future. Does Juno Dawson have a 2026 book release? I know that Juno Dawson has written a lot of more contemporary and dystopian leaning stories. Oh, it's Survival Show, isn't it? Juno Dawson's newest book. See, this does still sound really interesting to me. It says the rules are simple. Young women from all over the globe compete to join an all-singing, all-dancing pop group. If you win, a life of luxury awaits. But there's a catch. Eliminated contestants are literally eliminated. I feel like that's a really fun premise for a story, but also could have a lot to say about society and the moment that we're currently living in society. And I'm definitely not opposed to picking up some of Juno Dawson's work that is not in the adult fantasy space, but I would love to see more adult fantasy from Juno Dawson in the future. I actually really would like, because we had a prequel in this world, which was Queen Bee, that detailed the founding of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. And it wasn't my favorite installment in the series. Actually, it was my least favorite, but I think that I would really love to see some sort of story that details the war between the witches and the warlocks that all of our main characters played such a big part in, because like I said, it is such a big part of their character arc, and it really not only influences who they are as people, but also has so much relevance to the plot of this, and like the early seeds of the manifestation of this plot were sown during that war. And I think it's such an interesting area of this world that we have barely touched upon in this series. I do feel like it's a case of how, for example, in the Game of Thrones series, I am so preoccupied with the storyline of Lyanna Stark, and I really would like George R.R. Martin to write more into that area of the timeline, and like the overthrowing of the Mad King and all of the stuff that happened that directly affects all of the characters in Game of Thrones. I mean, it's a similar situation. All of those characters, or the older characters, should I say, had a part to play in this big rebellion plotline that we only really hear about. And I'm just so interested in that. Like, I'm so interested in the war plotline that we don't get to see a lot of in Her Majesty's Royal Coven as well. But I think you can probably tell from my glowing review the fact that this is the final book in a series that I've really enjoyed. I am going to be shelving this one, and this could cause us some problems. It's going on these shelves behind me. So this is the second and the third shelf of this bookcase, and these are always a little bit of a problem for me because I've either read the majority of what's on here, or it is sequels in a series that I've started, like for example the Belladonna series. That's a reread and resume project, which yes, I really need to get back on track with that. The same goes for the City of Brass. I want to reread book 1 to read the rest. The Atlas 6 is once again the same. And so moving anything around on here becomes a nightmare, but we do have two options here. The first one is that I've just got Stay for a Spell, I think it's called, which was the Goldsborough Fellowship book for the month of April. I am currently, I feel like I'm waving to get your guys' attention. I am currently an ambassador for Goldsborough, and if you would like to buy any of their in-stock books off their website, you can use my code BeccaBumxx10 to get 10% off, just if you're interested. But that's a recent edition. Haven't read it. It stands on its own, isn't tied to anything else on these shelves, so it's a great contender. This shelf, once again, wants to reread One Dark Window to read Two Twisted Crowns, Jazad Air, also would like to reread to finish off that duology. Rereading is a big problem for me. I like to do it to immerse myself in the world, but it really slows me down with sequels. The only other option that we really have is to remove Caraval by Stephanie Garber, which is a book that I read and shelved in an episode of Shelve It or Scrap It. I am very attached to this specific hardback because I bought this brand new when it was published. And I just feel like it's one of those books that's been here for so long that it is a part of my library that cannot be removed. However, realistically, while I did enjoy this book, I do think that the best thing for me to do with this series is to unhaul this hardback as much as I think it's gorgeous and pick myself up a paperback bundle of all 3 books on Vinted. So let's see if removing this from my shelf will help me to shelve Human Rights. I am tempted to go with Stay for a Spell. The only thing that's kind of pushing me more in this direction is that realistically, I do think that I should unhaul Caraval. I think it's the right decision and I'm just kind of putting off making that decision. So hopefully, these are similar size. I think Human Rights is slightly thicker, but I think we might be able to do it. I'm no longer complaining that this looks smaller than a 500-page book. How big is the Shadow Cabinet, out of curiosity? Because that to me looks like a 500-page book. Okay, this one is only 13 pages bigger than this one. Reagan from Peruse Project actually just made a short saying that she thinks that publishing houses are making fonts smaller to be able to make books smaller. And for some series, that's obviously making the print tiny. I feel like they look pretty similar in this. I feel like the spacing in between lines actually looks smaller in the Shadow Cabinet, even though this one I would say is definitely a smaller book. So who knows what's happening there. Oh, they look so good. Also question, when you guys shelve series that have a prequel, do you put the prequel at the beginning or where it was published? Because I'm definitely a beginning girly, but I have seen people put it here and that feels weird to me. So sadly, I will be unhauling Caraval. This was just a decision that really needed to be made. I've been looking at this book and thinking about it for quite some time. I feel like given that I gave this book a 3.5, it is a series that I want to continue on with. Definitely intrigued by what I read from this, but given that hardback space is so limited on my shelves, it's not something that I need to, one, keep in hardback, but then I'm also committed to storing 2 more books in this series. I ain't got the shelf space for that, so this one's gonna go, and we're gonna go back to the stacks to pick book number 3 for this vlog. So we are now down to an even 30 books in the stacks. We are making excellent progress. I have just had one of my wishes for this episode granted, so I'm not gonna be too greedy and hope for another one, but let's see what book 3 is gonna be. Is that one? Oh. It's Starside by Alex Astor. This is good though, because I did receive an arc of Starside and I haven't got to it yet. And now I of course also have the Fairy Loot edition. So this is one that's kind of a priority for me. Not only because obviously I haven't yet read the arc and this has now been released, but I now also have 2 copies of this book. This one is an adult romantasy that is set in a world that is split between the mortals and the gods. So I think that the gods live on Starside and the mortals live in Stormside. And every 50 years, the veil between the 2 falls and 50 mortals from Stormside can cross to Starside, can compete for the chance to access the magic of the gods so they can gain like health, wealth, success. And our main character is one of the 50 mortals that crosses over this time, but she does not want the power of the gods. She actually wants to kill them. So I'm interested in this trial setup we have. I love a competition, love a series of trials, and the reviews that I've seen so far have been pretty positive. This is a chunky one. She's another 500 pager, but I mean, I've done it before, I can do it again. And this is also going to be my first foray into Alex Astor. I haven't picked up her YA, and at this point I haven't heard amazing things about that series, so I probably won't, but I'm hoping that I'll enjoy Starside. I have switched over to the art copy to read this one because I mean the pages are slightly more low maintenance than the Fairy Loot edition. My issue with sprayed edges, not that I dislike them or anything, it's definitely a me problem, but my nails, like if I accidentally, I dropped the book on my nail yesterday when I was trying to pick it up off the table and now there's a scuff on it. But I'd rather scuff this one than the Fairy Loot, even though this is also a really gorgeous edition. But I'm now 120 112 pages into this, and I also picked a very fitting bookmark. I feel like it goes very well with the theme of this edition. This is one of my Patreon bookmarks, by the way. I think it's from July or August last year, but I'm 112 pages into this. I am loving it, and I am genuinely surprised because this book starts at breakneck speed and the pace does not slow down. And typically, you know, I love a slow start into a fantasy. I want to know who you are, where you live, the entire history of your world, like extensively. Tell me about every land within this world as well. Give me all of the information before you so much just step a foot outside of your house. But no, this dives right into the plot. In the synopsis that I already gave you of this, we established that the world's split into two halves. There is a gate between them. Actually, it's not like a veil, it's a physical gate, and the gods live on one side and the immortals live on one side, the humans live on the other side. Every 50 years, 50 humans can cross, and they get the opportunity to travel to this like pool full of magic, and they all have a cup. They can fill their cup with magic, and then they have to try and get that cup full of magic back to the gates, like an epic egg and spoon race. But not only do they have to do all of this, they're all constantly trying to kill each other along the way. So we don't start off with 50 people. We don't all nicely queue up at the gates and wait for the gates to open and walk through them. It starts off, I'm pretty sure because our main character, we find it very early on from her backstory that she is from a town that no longer exists. It was destroyed by a god, and so the reason why she's embarking on this quest is because she wants to kill that god. And so the place where she lives now, I'm pretty sure is very close to the place where this gate opens. There used to be magic on the human half of the world as well, but now they don't have any, which is why the opportunity to bring this magic back is so important. And because of their lack of magic, they're struggling in every way possible. But in this town that is close to the gates that are going to open, there is a big rock. And the first part of these trials is to get on the rock. You have like 10 minutes to get on the rock. And if you get on the rock, then you can proceed to the next level. Now, while you're trying to get on that rock, and this is literally chapter 1, our main character is trying to get on this rock while people are trying to kill her. And it is pretty brutal. It's very much given like cornucopia Hunger Games. I will say that the Hunger Games influence in this is strong. We even have like a Haymitch style character that has participated in these trials in the past, which all of this information is given to us like literally in the first chapter. But then after you have to scramble on the rock, there's say like 200 people there. You then go through something called the culling, which is what happens while these people are traveling between the rocks. So I think they get like a day to recover. The morning after, they are then going to embark upon their journey to the gates. And along that journey is the culling, where the people are cut down from however many get on the rock to the 50 that go through the gates. So they are constantly fighting and slaughtering each other till that moment. And then when they get through the gates, they have to travel through this strange land that they've never been. They don't really know any people who've been here, and the people who have been here don't really talk about it. They don't know anything about the immortal people. They don't know anything about the creatures that inhabit this land. And they have to travel then from one side to the other, get their magic, and get back and through the gate in 50 days. It's intense. And we start, like I said, in that very first chapter with everyone scrambling to get on this rock. 112 pages in, I'm well into the throes of this whole trial challenge situation we have going on. It is given not only Hunger Games, it has strong Red Queen vibes. And I'm not talking in the way that Powerless does, but I loved Red Queen. I feel like the way that it's reminded me of Red Queen is that metal plays a big part in this world, and it kind of, I think it's because silver is like your top tier metal, and in Red Queen the people are like segregated between silver bloods, who are people with powers, and red bloods, who are regular humans. So I think it's the emphasis on silver as well as this competition element that we have. In Red Queen, they're competing to become the queen of the realm and like marry the prince. It's got like bachelor elements, whereas in here they're competing for something different. But the emphasis and obsession with silver, the segregation between not only the like magical immortal people, but also people who are just generally more affluent in this world. Normally they have people who've completed these trials in the past, and so their families have boons and advantages that other people don't have, and they're obviously like decked in silver, which is reminding me a lot of Red Queen. I'm also very intrigued about our romance element that we have in here, because there is a guy, honestly at this point I can't even tell you his name. I don't think he's even, oh, he is. His name is Harlan Raker. In the synopsis, he's described as a merciless and mysterious Kingsguard. He is also participating in these trials, which I don't really understand. I guess he's participating on behalf of the king and that he's intending to bring the magic back from the king, because everyone else in this world seems to be doing it either for their family or for the good of their town, whereas this guy has like a full suit of armor. I don't even know what he looks like. I know he has black tattoos on his fingers, and I'm already sold. I'm already here for it. So I'm assuming that he is going to be the love interest. But there is also a guy in here called Zane who is a little bit friendlier than Harlan Raker. Every interaction we've had with him has been hostile at best. But I just feel like there's some sexual tension there for some reason. But then there's this other guy called Zane who is also participating in these trials. Pretty much everyone is, who's like in the main cast of characters of this book. And he's a little friendlier. I would totally be down to like an allies, friends to lovers situation going on. However, I do think that when we get to the romantic portion of this book, it is going to focus more on Harlan Raker. He kind of reminds me of like Slade from the Plated Prisoner series. So far, I am enthralled. I'm having such a good time. It's passing so quickly, which it's not super common for a book to grip me this early on, where I'm like blasting through the first 100 pages, and especially because this has gone from 0 to 100 so quickly. Normally I find that quite jarring, but just something about this at the very beginning, maybe it's its kind of familiarity, like it stands on its own right now and it's becoming its own story, but I can see the influences that it's pulled from other things that I love. So maybe the comparison to things that I'm already really familiar with has helped me to get sucked into this super quickly. But I also think that Alex Astor is doing a really good job of not only explaining the world but also expanding the world, so that I'm not wondering about all of these different elements, like, oh, I wonder why this is like this. Like, our main character is inquisitive and she is searching for answers, so the reader is being fed like little tidbits of information, which is satisfying my curiosity, which we all know is endless. At 300 pages into Starside, I feel like I'm hitting a little bit of a brick wall with this book, to the point where I kind of feel like it's lost the majority of its charm. There is essentially no variation in the pace of this book, to the point where now it is just a blur of the same kind of event happening over and over again. The pace has still not slowed from the very beginning, and it's also kind of following a formula now of entering into a new location in the immortal side of this world where the main challenge is taking place, and then there's some sort of encounter with either a beast, like a magical creature, or an like environmental anomaly that almost kills the main character, and then she fights it off, and then we move on. We have a little bit of downtime. Maybe we rest up and recover. Maybe we reach like a checkpoint and we like replenish our supplies, and then we rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And at first it was really fun because I was enjoying exploring this world, both the human side of it, and I actually thought that the way that we got into these trials was really interesting with the culling and how we didn't start with these 50 challenges. We actually had to narrow it down from 200 down to the 50. And then when we got to the immortal lands, it was obviously vastly different to the human lands. And from the very first encounter we had there, I was hooked. But now that it's just the same repetitive events over and over and over again, I've gotten to the point where I'm really struggling to pay attention because I don't feel like anything new is happening. I feel like this book is trying to do far too much. The world is too big. And while it was fun to start off with, like exploring all of the different little niches of this world, all of the different creatures, there's an endless amount of forests and they all have this unique little twist, which at this point is getting really, really tired. But to start off with, like all of these little individual things, all of these mini quests were really cool, and now it actually kind of feels like Skyrim, not in terms of story or setting or anything like that. You know how when you're the hero of a game, you can join the Fighters Guild, you can join the Mages Guild, you can join the Thieves Guild, and you can reach the top of all of those guilds, and you can get all of the unique armor, the unique weapons that come with all of those guilds. And then, of course, you're also the hero of the realm when you complete the main storyline, and you get all of the boons and perks associated with that. And then you can also go hunt in these like dank, dark dungeons and get all of this like legendary weaponry and armor. And you, as the main character of this video game, get all of the loot. That's what it feels like in this book. It feels like we are going like zigzagging across this world. And I am reading the arc, which now that I'm not paying as much attention, or I'm struggling to pay as much attention, I have reverted to immersion reading. And I do think that the book has been edited quite a bit in between the arc and the like finished copy. I've only listened to about 3 chapters, but it is deviating quite a bit from the text that I'm reading, and I'm finding that quite distracting because like I'm trying to figure out where we are on the page while I'm listening. So I think I'm going to go and grab the finished Fairy Loot copy if I'm going to be listening to the audiobook, to see if the audiobook follows that a lot better, which it should. But back to my point, there isn't a map in the art copy, so I'm going to grab the Fairy Loot one at some point and see if there's one in there, because we do actually talk about a map within the context of the book. But it really feels like, considering there was a part of this book where the main character was like, okay, we need to go here and we need to do this thing and we should do this first because time is of the essence. Like the faster we travel, the better. And considering that was like a main point of this story early on, I feel like we're now meandering all over the place, getting sidetracked by a bunch of different stuff and collecting all of these like interesting items and skills along the way. I would be really interested to see if there is a map in the Fairy Loot version actually, because with all of the like maneuvering we're doing, I feel like we've hit up like dozen locations so far in this book, and I have 200 pages to go. It would be really interesting to see kind of where we're up to on the path and how far we still have to go, because I have no idea, and at this point the journey seems endless. And like I said, there's 50 days to get from the gates to the magic pool and then back again. I actually don't think I know how far into this timeline is. I don't think the main character has mentioned. I don't think they've been keeping track, actually. So I cracked open the Fairy Loot edition to check out if there was a map. And there is indeed. It's a pretty intense one, and the path that our characters take through this is also pretty intense. So the gates that they come through are over here, and the place that they're trying to get to is over here, and they have 50 days to get there and back. But the path they've taken to get there is truly unhinged. They went this way, all the way around the edge of the map. I'm pretty sure then, when they got to here, I'm pretty sure that they've been here. So then they came down, and then they're going to go this way to the land of the god. And there's all of this stuff down here, which I'm assuming is going to become relevant at some point, like the dueling rings. They look cool. Vanda Everen's estate, I feel like that's going to be super relevant. So we still have like all of this bottom stuff as of yet unexplored. And then these guys, I think, as well. I don't think we've wandered up into this corner either. Been out to celebrate my best friend's birthday today, and I have had a couple of spicy margs, my first ever spicy margs. Can confirm I am a fan. I really enjoyed them, and it is now quite late, but in the car on the way home I finished Starside by Alex Aster, and I really enjoyed it. I do think that there is a bit of a blip in the pacing where it gets really boring and repetitive between, I want to say, around 150 to 300 pages. So it's a significant portion of the book. I don't think I've ever actually read a fantasy book that has a map as dense as this one, where the characters like hit every single landmark on that map in book one. But I feel like I have to appreciate the exploration of the world in here, because I'm the first person to complain about a fantasy story that takes place in a really interesting world and then doesn't take the time to explore that world. I wish that we'd had some variation in the events of the plot, and it wasn't arrive at a place, almost die, relax and recover and then kind of pick up again and do the exact same thing. Maybe we could have just passed through some of them. Maybe we could have had some nice descriptions about something unique about this particular area and then moved on. But I did enjoy exploring this world. I think that if you are a fan of things like Fourth Wing, you'll have a really, really good time with Starside, because I thought that the writing style in here was compulsively readable, apart from for the first 150 pages and the last like 200 pages. I was eating this up. I honestly could not put it down. The love interest, I'm a little unsure about, because it's given I can fix him, and I don't know if we can. He was a little bit mean, like really upfront in his meanness actually throughout a lot of this. It wasn't given the like defensive bad boy with a heart of gold. It was just given like surly, unapproachable and unapologetic about it. I did feel some of the sexual tension there, but there were moments in the dialogue between them that I was like, damn, he's not going to give an inch. He's not going to give an inch in this conversation. He's not going to admit to even an inkling of attraction here. Like, he's going to remain cold and hard throughout the entire thing, which I mean, for the most part, he did. That did not stop, however, us having a little smutty moment in this book. I have heard this pitched as romantasy. Obviously, the finished copy that I have is from the Fairy Loot adult sub, not their romantasy. And I would say that this is one that has romance as a kind of central focus, in that the characters that are involved or will be involved romantically are always around each other for like a large portion of this book. However, I wouldn't say that the events of this book are overly romantic, which for me is perfect. It's what I want. Like, I don't want any overly romantic content in the first like 2/3 of the book. The later in the book, the better. If this would have held off until the sequel, I also would have been absolutely fine with that. Another reason why I feel like this book is perfect for fans of Fourth Wing, and I gave Fourth Wing 5 stars, okay? I will preface my comment with that. I really, really enjoyed Fourth Wing. I do, however, maintain that Fourth Wing is very, very enjoyable, but it's not necessarily the best book that I've ever read. I feel like in that series, or in book 1, I've only read the first book so far, I feel like Rebecca Yarros does a really good job of presenting a bunch of really popular tropes. So we have like the animal companion trope, we have a hate to love situation, we have the training academy, and they're all executed in a way that people love to see them done. Like dragons. When I hear there's going to be dragons in a book, I am always so excited, but there are so many dragon books that have disappointed me because they're not fun, cute animal companions, you know? Normally they're either dicks, or they're like not super present, or like they're the antagonists of the book, and they never manifest in the way that I want them to. In Fourth Wing, it is exactly the way that I want to see dragons represented. And I feel like Rebecca Yarros does that for every single trope in that book. I feel like this is another book that is chock full of tropes that is executed in a way that people will really enjoy to consume them. I don't think that this is a completely unique story. In fact, I feel like it had a lot of hallmarks of other popular series that I've read. There are quite a few points in this where I feel like it very closely mirrors Game of Thrones. There was a line in this, I can't really say anything without spoilers because it comes later on, but essentially there is a prophecy in Game of Thrones of a prince who was promised, and that is the way that they phrase it, a prince who was promised. And in this book we have a moment where the phrase is mentioned, like something who was promised. We also have dragon elements, which I didn't know there was a dragon in this book, even though there's a massive one on the Fairy Loot cover. I actually thought there was going to be phoenixes, a phoenix in this book, which I mean, there are phoenixes in this world, they are mentioned. I did think we were going to see one though, because the little icon at the beginning of every chapter looks to me like a phoenix. It doesn't look like a dragon. Maybe I'm just wrong though. Am I just wrong? But we also have, there is an iconic scene in Game of Thrones, I think in season 1, with Daenerys Targaryen, which I feel very closely mirrors something that happens in here. There is a moment in Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo with a stag, which I felt was very closely mirrored in here. There is a scene in the Akatar series in the Bog of Urid with some like undead that I felt was very closely mirrored in here. And so I feel like it has a lot of very popular, very common things interwoven throughout it. It's not like a direct ripoff of anything, I would say. I still feel like it is an enjoyable story that stands on its own. And like I said, I ate it up. I was sucked into this, but I wonder if it has done enough to set it apart from all of these other series that I feel like it has drawn upon. That being said, I liked this enough that I want to keep both of my copies, which is an illegal move, I know, and this is even more complicated because we're currently renovating the spare room. We're actually at the point this weekend, we've got paint samples, so we're going to be priming all of the walls and deciding on paint colors so we can hopefully get the painting done probably like in a week or so. But that does mean that my bookcase that is up there is currently in boxes, and these are not going to fit on the shelves that I have over there. So I have the books from that shelf in 2 boxes upstairs on my bedroom floor, and I've been doing kind of like a 1-for-1 policy on those. I did unhaul a handful of things when I was like packing them up into boxes, so I don't really know, like I haven't kept track of where I'm up to in this 1-for-1 ratio. So I think that the only way that we can kind of resolve this is if I look at an old video or an old photo and see how many books are on the shelf, and then I count all the books in the boxes and see where we're at, see if we have any space to slide maybe at least one of these in without having to pull one out. And then in terms of replacing it with a book to read for this video, if we do need to balance that, I think I'm just going to pick something like Close in the Alphabet. I mean, it's not going to work exactly, but it's the best I can do right now. The reason why I'm keeping both of these, by the way, I don't feel like this is a series that at this moment I need both copies of, but of course this was sent to me by Bloomsbury. It's a numbered one, and obviously like it's a pretty fancy one, and so I want to keep hold of this one anyway. Obviously it was a privilege to receive it, and thank you so much to Bloomsbury for sending this one my way. But then I can't guarantee, because this is an ARC, that I would have a matching copy of the sequel for this. So I want to keep hold of the Fairy Loot because I think it's highly likely, because this has a really high rating, average rating on Goodreads, and it's pretty popular. So I think it's highly likely that Fairy Loot will make a matching edition of Stormside, which I'm pretty sure the title has been very recently announced. So I want to keep hold of this one so that I have an actual finished copy. And to be fair, I do stash my ARCs behind the other books on my bookshelves, and it's some of the ARCs that I had stashed that I cleared out when I put things in boxes, as well as a couple of other bits. But I'm hoping that I do have some space in those boxes that I can at least slip one of these in, and I don't have to account for 2 books, because we also still have to knock one more book out of the stacks. So I got my work cut out for me right now. So I'm here on the floor with my boxes of books, and I cannot believe what I'm about to tell you, but I went through the last couple of episodes of Shelve It or Scrap It that had the bookcase in that all these books have come off, and there's 6 shelves in that bookcase, and I managed to count all of the shelves except for the bottom one. So of the 5 shelves, I have all of the books that like you can see, and then at the back of each shelf is 4 books. So they're stacked, like there's 2 books like this, and then there's a row of books like this. So for every shelf, I added 4 books on, which are the ones that you can't see. From the 5 shelves that I could see, I counted 75 books, and then I divided that by 5, and that gave me an average of 15 books per shelf. And I was like, okay, I can't see this final shelf, so I'll just add 15 on as an average, and that's how many shelves we'll say that this bookcase holds. So I've just counted every single book in these boxes. There are 82 books in these boxes. And there is no way, I know I used an average, but there is no way that bottom shelf has 8 less books than the average shelf in there. I just don't feel like that can be the case. I know it had some big books on it because it has the entire Empire of the Vampire trilogy, as well as a spare copy of House of Earth and Blood, but I just genuinely can't find a video. I went back like 7 episodes of Shelve It or Scrap It. So by that logic, that means that I can just put these in this box and I can go back to the stacks. It feels wrong. It feels wrong because I know, like I said, I unhauled a couple of things, but then I've also put a couple of things in here. So I thought that we were pretty much even, if not over. I thought I was going to be over, but that's the math. So it may It may work out. I was so prepared to have to read 2 books to be able to shelve these 2 books and then have to go back to the stacks and read another one. It may work out that when we get the shelves back up, which I don't think they'll be up by the next episode, it might be the episode after, it may turn out that when we do that I have more books than I have shelf space. But right now, based on the math, which is the best I can do right now, these guys can just slip right into this box and I can slip myself right back downstairs to select us another book. Okay, so let's pick what should maybe be our final book of this vlog. The last book we need to remove from the stacks. That is 19. Okay. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This does not bode well though, because if this goes the way that I want it to, I'm going to want to shelve this, and I don't think that there is a way out of this one. I think she's just going to have to go on the shelf and something else is going to have to come off. But this is Anathema by Carrie Lake, one of the ones that I really wanted to come up. So I feel like I've done really well. Every other book that we picked has been one of the ones that I wanted. So I was actually talking about this today, and also Nocticadia. For some reason, I really want to read Anathema first, even though I know a lot of people seem to prefer Nocticadia. Hopefully I'll enjoy both. I think that Carrie Lake writes gothic romance with a lot of pine in. I'm expecting it to be atmospheric because I've heard it referred to as gothic quite a lot, and I believe that she also has a lot of spooky elements in her books as well. So this one, I think it takes place in the woods. So we're following a main character who ends up in somewhere called the Eating Woods, as the villagers refer to it, because what's taken is never returned, and there she encounters Zavander Rydane, the cursed lord of Eidolon. Zavander must protect Mavith, whose blood can break his curse, but his growing obsession with her threatens to destroy everything, including himself. Well, we love a dedicated man that pines, so hopefully we have a lot of that. This is a 600 page book. You know what? It's fine. What was the shortest book I've read? I think it was This Vicious Grace. That was not a short book. This book is quite intense on a couple of different levels, actually. The first one that I was immediately confronted with is that this book has a glossary, which is amazing. We love a glossary in case we need to refer to anything in a fantastical world. But this glossary is like, let me have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pages long. It's broken down into different sections. So you have like a breakdown of the family tree of all of the different races in this world, which I've been looking at this recently. Now I know a little bit about some of them and I honestly can't figure that out. There's then a breakdown of all of the races. You have a regular glossary. You have a glossary of the gods in the world, the glyphs, which at this point, I don't think I actually know what they are at all. That was a little bit scary when I first opened this book because I wasn't actually expecting this to be especially dense, and I do think that it fluctuates in its density given which perspective we're following, because this is dual perspective. The 2 characters we're following, I'm assuming, are going to be romantically involved whenever we get to that part of the book. However, at the point that I'm at, they still haven't met, so at this point this is delivering on its promise to be a slow burn. But the second way in which this is intense is that it is dark, and I feel like I have often read books that claim to be dark that have under-delivered, and so when I started reading this one, I was genuinely shocked. I do have this tendency though, being like, yeah, I want to read a horror, and then I'm surprised when the horror is actually, you know, like horrific. This is definitely deeply disturbing on multiple levels. So the great thing about this is that Carrie Lake has provided a list of content warnings. There is a note on content at the beginning of this book, and she refers you to her website if you would like a full list of content warnings that also reveal spoilers about the book. So if you need those, they're available to you, which I think is amazing, and I'm so glad that that has been included at the beginning of this. A brief run through of a handful of the ones that I've encountered so far that I don't find to be be particularly spoilery. Threat of sexual assault, actual sexual assault and abuse, body mutilation, death of animals. There's also in the prologue of this, there's like harm to a baby. It's also a little bit grotesque in its description sometimes. It doesn't shy away from the details. And within all of these elements, there is definitely intent to disturb the reader. And you know what? Consider me disturbed. There are so many elements of this that I find very uncomfortable to read, but I do definitely think that it's successful in creating this deeply unsettling, eerie atmosphere. I've talked about this in the past, but when I read books, I do see them in my mind. I have a very vivid imagination. If the writing, like if the description and the atmosphere is on point, then I will be able to see them quite clearly. But something that always stands out to me within that imagery is the color palette that I am perceiving the book in, if that makes sense. And this is grayscale. Like, it's not completely black and white, but it's like heavily desaturated, which is very in keeping with the gothic horror story that I was promised with this one. So a little bit more on the plot of this, because I went into this just knowing that there was a creepy wood and that there was a romantic element. That's all I knew. But essentially it is dual perspective, and it's set in a world where there are different realms almost. There is no map in this book, and I do actually wish that there were, because one of our characters especially is doing a lot of traveling. But aside from the fact that he's traveling around his area of the world, there is also a split between the dimension, I want to say, that the mortals reside in and the dimension that the magical creatures reside in. And our female main character Mavis is on the mortal side of this. Her father has just died, her grandfather is dead, and she is actually somebody who was found on the edge of the woods when she was a baby, taken in by this family, and I'm pretty sure the woman who is now her guardian is her grandmother, who absolutely despises her. She also has a sister who is not a blood relation. None of these people in this family are blood related to each other, which is great because there's an uncomfortable sexual relationship within this family as well, which, you know, I'll let you discover that. But she does have a sister who she's very close to, but the woman that's now her guardian does not like her very much. It reads very much like a historical fiction. The kind of vibe that I'm getting from the description of this is something akin to like The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. It is given like witch trial era kind of story, which does very much fit into the themes of this book. But women are not allowed to live in a property without a male guardian if they are unmarried women. And so this woman's first port of call is to marry off these two sisters. Now, they don't want this for a number of reasons, but one of those reasons is that men in this world, in this era, tend to be a little bit cruel. But on top of this, there is a stigma that has surrounded our main character her entire life because of the circumstances under which she was found as a baby. The townspeople have always considered her as somebody who possesses witchcraft. I apologize for this. I'm pretty sure that Kami is on the cusp of going into season, and she's very, very clingy. Like, super, even if I give her like some sort of attention, it is not enough. She is a menace right now. But back to the book. This girl has always been the subject of the townspeople's gossip. They say that she's cursed, she's a witch, like she's evil. They say that she's killed people, none of which is proven. It's all superstition. And when people are convicted of such things in this world, they are taken to the boundary of the eating woods, where the woods do indeed eat them. So moving on to the male perspective, this is where it gets a little bit more confusing, because in comparison to Mavis' perspective, the male character that we follow, Zavanda, his perspective is incredibly dense, because Mavis is a mortal in a mortal land, and Zavanda is a cursed mage that has like an affliction. I'm pretty sure because he lives on the magical side of the world, I don't think he was ever truly mortal, but in the epilogue of this, you see something incredibly cruel done to him that has manifested in this power that he now has. And you also see like the effect that similar circumstances have had on his family. But the prologue is like 200 years-ish before the rest of the story. So you see him essentially as a baby, and then we follow him as a man. And he is one of the king's most trusted assassins. He's part of this elite order of assassins, and he is currently trying to track down 7 stones, like bloodstones, from 7 different bloodlines to achieve something, which I will admit, up to this point in the book, has been kind of explained, but I don't love the world building when we're in his perspective. It's a lot. Like, I'm glad that we have that glossary, that I can refer back to. And Kerry Lake does kind of give you an example. She introduces a term and then explains it directly afterwards. And then you obviously have the glossary to refer back to if you need to later down the line. But I do feel like in scenes where we're explaining like why the world is the way that it is, or what Zavander's purpose is, and like what his plot line is going to be, it's very heavily info dumpy. And on top of like the extra terminology, his perspective I'm struggling with a little bit more. And I do find it just a little bit jarring because you're flipping from Mavis' perspective, which I'm actually really enjoying and I'm finding very compelling, and then Zavander's perspective, which is like low-key giving me a headache. So at the point that I'm at, their storylines have not really intersected yet. We've seen little glimpses of where they might, which for a reference, because I don't think I've told you, I'm on page 178, so almost a third of the way through this. They are at this point still on very separate tracks. Now, I have not been reading a lot over the last few days, and I do feel like my progress in this book is slow. However, I can't tell whether that's because I just generally haven't been reading much, so it's taken me like 3 days to get this far into the book, and so it feels slow, or whether the book itself is actually slow, because like I said, when I'm reading Mavis' perspective especially, I am finding it quite compelling. But I do think that like almost 200 pages into the book, and I don't know where Mavis' perspective especially is going. We've got a little bit of a glimmer of an insight into what's maybe going on with her, but I don't know what the story of this book is going to be yet. And I feel like I'm a significant amount of the way through it. I don't necessarily mind because I do love a slow moving story, but at this point I'm kind of eager to see things starting to come together. So kind of mixed feelings on it so far. I am enjoying it. I'm not as, I guess, overwhelmingly obsessed with it as I would have liked to have been, given that this was kind of almost a 5-star prediction for me. I do say that with a pinch of salt because then I tend to go into things with overly high expectations, but I had heard very good things, and because of that I was very enthusiastic. So I don't quite have that level of passion for it at this stage, but I am, I would say, still enjoying it. I have been feeling really slumpy over the last couple of days, which, to be fair, I don't think is the book's fault, but I do think that it could be impacting my enjoyment of the book, because long story short, we finally got our bathroom finished yesterday. I know it's been like almost 5 months since that project started, but I essentially spent all Wednesday stressed about it. All yesterday I was dealing with it. I had to put my big girl pants on and make some demands of the company that finally came yesterday to finish it and fix a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm just feeling really drained from the whole experience. And I really hate that any kind of minor, it's not a minor inconvenience, I guess, but any kind of unpleasant thing that I have to do, sometimes it takes me like 2 days to recover from it. I was trying to read last night and the outcome is really good. Like at the point that we're at now with the bathroom, I can say goodbye to this company forever, hopefully, which is great, but I just could not relax and I was so mentally drained that I could not retain a single word of what I was reading. And today as well, I've also found it really hard to focus. So I'm hoping to make some more progress in this today, but I'm currently 430 pages into it. So I've got about 170 pages still left. This one is definitely slow going. I typically don't mind that, and I actually don't mind it too much in this. I'm enjoying the exploration of the world. I know that this has a sequel. Given some of the information we got in this book, I originally didn't know whether it was going to be following some different characters. Essentially, our male main character is one of the king's assassins, but there are 4 of them. And the way that they're introduced, it feels kind of, you know, like the cadre or like the warriors in the Legends of Thesmar, where I was wondering whether we were actually going to have different books following like different assassins, given that this does have a romantic element to it. But I actually think that the sequel is going to be following the same characters that we're following now, which is great news to me because I actually prefer series like that as opposed to where they're kind of interconnected but they follow different characters in every book. But I don't know what the actual plot of the storyline is going to be. As our main character character is new to this world, we're kind of learning at the same speed as her. And now that I'm a lot further into this book, I am finding it a lot easier to read Zavander's perspective because it's a lot less intense now that we're also kind of catching up with the world from, I guess, like a beginner's perspective with the main character of Mavis. So my enjoyment has definitely balanced out in that regard. And I do feel like that there is an element of this book that is very reminiscent to me of ACOTAR. If you guys don't know what ACOTAR is about, let me tell you, let me educate you right now. I'm actually, the next book that I pick up when I'm done with this vlog is going to be my reread of ACOTAR, but it's essentially following this girl and she accidentally, debatable really, she kind of knows what she's doing but she also doesn't believe in it, she kills a fey wolf shifter thinking it's probably just an ordinary wolf. And it's not. This is like a world that is split between the fairy lands and the human lands. And the Fey Lord finds out that she's killed this wolf and he drags her back to the fairy lands as his prisoner. It's like a life for a life kind of thing. But instead of killing her, he's going to make her live out the rest of her life in the fairy lands on his estate as like his prisoner, but he's not actually imprisoning her really. But I find that that kind of setup is exactly what we have going on in here. We have our character of Mavis, who is from this human land. She doesn't know about these magical realms at all, and she ends up crossing the divide between the human and the magical realms, and she's found immediately, like kind of as she crosses over, and everyone's freaked out because she's immortal. So she ends up living in Zavander's castle, where he throws her in like an elaborate dungeon, but she's not like a prisoner in the official sense, and she starts to learn more about the world through the people who live in this castle, like Zavander's sister and this mage that's like also there at the time, and we have loads of different characters that pop up. And it is reminding me so much of ACOTAR, how we have this mortal that crosses into this magical land, and then we start very simply in book one, just learning about the Fae and like the immediate area that she's in. And then every book in the series obviously builds upon that and widens the world. And I feel like we're getting that kind of pacing in here as well, where she starts by learning about Zavander, the castle that she's currently in, the magic that immediately surrounds her. And then as time goes on, she's gradually widening her bubble of knowledge, and us of course alongside her. So I'm actually really enjoying that parallel, and I'm wondering if that's why I'm not minding that the story is pretty slow, because the way that this is unfurling actually feels really familiar to me. I wouldn't say that I'm obsessed with this yet though. I'm very much in a middle ground right now where I'm enjoying my time reading it, but I'm not like passionate about it in any way. So I'm really intrigued to see if the last just under 200 pages does anything to dramatically change my mind, because I've never heard a lukewarm review of this book. It's either I didn't like it, / I DNF'd it, or oh my god, this is the best thing I've ever read. And so far, I'm in neither of those camps. So I finished Anathema, and I do feel like I deserve a round of applause because I've been reading this book for I think over a week at this point, and it's not the book's fault. I did take time out to do a 24-hour readathon and there was other stuff going on, but I have been reading this for what feels like the longest time. The good news though is that last section I feel won me over, and I'm definitely more in the camp of really enjoying this than not caring about it at all. I do think that the second half of this was much more compelling and absorbing to me than the first half. As I've mentioned, I had issues with the world building, and it is one of those books where I do want to reread the beginning of this actually, because a lot of those things in Zavander's perspective that I wasn't getting because I hadn't spent enough time in this world to really understand what they meant. I feel like if I went back and I reread those, I would obviously understand what was going on at the beginning a little bit more now that I've read the entire book and I know a lot more about this world, and that would actually be quite helpful because there are points quite late in this book that reference some of the things that Zavander was talking about right at the beginning, because there is an overarching plot in here which centers around this like big bad mage, and that topic is something that was very present in Zavander's earlier perspectives when I didn't really know what was going on in this world. I do really like Carrie Lake's writing style and also the atmosphere of this one, although I do think that there are sections of this book where the description is a little bit overworked, a little bit overwritten. It can read a little bit clunky with a quite flowery prose that that did feel a tad overdone at times. But overall, I found this to be really immersive. The more I got into the story, the more that I was sucked into the world, and the more that the characters grew on me. I always enjoyed the main character of Mavith, but Zavander took a little bit more time for me to warm up to, probably because I wasn't super immersed in his perspectives at the beginning of this. The very end of this book, I was about to start rolling my eyes a little bit, because this is a slow burn and you don't really have any actual physical romantic altercations between them until getting to the very end of this book. And I actually thought that that was going to be, that was going to be the final moment of this book. Like, not an epic plot twist, not kind of giving me any kind of insight into where we were going in the next book, but on a spicy scene. And in the 11th hour, Kerry Lake gave me a moment that I wasn't expecting, and that is making me very, very excited to pick up the sequel in this duology. I'm also really excited to pick up Nocticadia now as well, because I've heard that that's even better, and I'm also really intrigued about that one because it's a standalone, and fantasy standalones, you know, that they don't always work for me, so I'm interested to see what Kerry Lake does with that one. This was also super reminiscent to me of ACOTAR, and I can't even tell you why, because this is a story that stands on its own. Thematically, atmospherically, it is nothing like ACOTAR. There are the little bits that I've already mentioned that I feel like mirror the series, and we also had just a couple of tiny elements that kind of threw me back to Throne of Glass as well. I feel like Kerry Lake has read Sarah J Maas, which, I mean, amongst the fantastical romance genre, I'm not sure how many authors haven't at this point, but I feel like it was potentially the pacing or the structure of this book or something. This is obviously smuttier than ACOTAR, especially like in the earlier ACOTAR books, but there was just something in here that really threw me back to that series, which is great because Sarah J Maas is what started my love of romantasy as I know it today. I'd read some paranormal romance, some contemporary romance, and it was Sarah J Maas that introduced me to the world of like high fantasy mixed with romance. As I said at the beginning of this one, it does also contain a lot of dark elements, so I would definitely take full advantage of Kerry Lake's list of trigger warnings if that is something that you feel like you may need, because there are parts of this that are deeply unsettling and kind of just pushed the events of this book that little bit further into the area of making me feel uncomfortable. And I actually really enjoyed that about this book, because while I have read a lot of romantasy in my time, I don't think I've actually read a whole ton of gothic romance that has so many horror elements in it. And horror is something I'm a little bit hit or miss with. Like, I'm not at the point with the genre where I really know what I enjoy and can pinpoint what I enjoy, but I do feel like the blend of the horror elements, the fantasy, and the romance in here worked really well for me. So as you can probably tell, I did rate this one quite highly. It wasn't a 5-star as I maybe hoped it would be, but I would say it is a very solid, like a very high 4-star, and I'm very, very eager to continue on and also to read more from Kerry Lake, which means we're going to be shelving this one, which could pose a bit of a problem because we're at the point now where the stacks are where we need them to be. We have removed 4 books from the stacks, which are the conditions we need to fulfill to end this episode, but we can't end this episode until we've got this book securely on a shelf and like fully resolved. And given that this is going on the romance shelves upstairs, I don't know if we're going to be able to do that, so I guess we'll just take a look. So as we know up here, the alphabet is more of a suggestion than it is a fixed thing. But the one thing that I want to do with this book is get it next to Nocticadia. But I also want to keep my Raven Kennedy books together. So I don't really know how we're going to do this, but I'm essentially just going to move things around until we get this on. Maybe we'll have something that we have to read. Maybe we won't, because I thought that these shelves were currently really tight, but there's just a little gap here. And I'm wondering if we can do something with this little gap to make a bigger gap somewhere else. So that's the idea. We'll see if it works. Emma Hamm can definitely go before. Ali Hazelwood. I think the issue here actually is that Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood, I've just read it, so it's on my cart. So I'm going to have to find somewhere for that to go at the end of the month, but it wouldn't have fit in this gap anyway, so we're not going to think about that right now. This maybe actually creates a gap that Anathema can fit in. However, it needs to go next to Nocticadia, and I don't think moving that is going to do what we need it to. Nah, that's a little bit too tight. So maybe the issue we have here is that Nocticadia and Anathema have to go somewhere else. But where? We've done it. We have achieved the impossible. So to my great surprise, we have actually reached the end of episode 25. I am so shocked that I managed to get Anathema on those shelves. I have been struggling more and more if I get any new romance to actually get them on there, because there's not very much. I don't think there's anything on those shelves right now that I would unhaul without giving a chance. So everything at this point has to be read, or at least attempted to be moved off the shelf, or it's something that I've read and I've really enjoyed and I want to keep. But we did manage it, and we have a big old we have a big old stack of books to talk about that we have worked through in episode 5. So first off, the books that we actually read from the stacks, there were of course 4 of those. The minimum requirement for this vlog of course was that I removed 4 books from the stacks, and I have of course achieved that. Why are you here again? Please? No, actually, you've just eaten a spider. Speaking of spiders, actually, which we have more than I am comfortable with in this vlog, if you are scared of spiders, maybe don't pick up this book. Just saying. So for the 4 books that I read from this vlog, only one of them I have scrapped, and I still really enjoyed this one. I just don't think I have the level of investment in it that I need to own hardback copies of this. I would actually, now that it's been a couple of weeks, I'd be quite happy to just read the sequel to this on ebook and then move on with my life. So I might get that from Libby and try and do that at some point in the future, but we'll see. And then the other 3 I have shelved alongside these 3. I also shelved my additional copy of Starside, which, you know, I'm not a huge fan these days of keeping multiple editions of books that are not my absolute favorite series ever. But my intention with these guys is to kind of see what the future holds. If Bloomsbury do a matching edition of this, amazing. If they don't, I'll keep hold of this because, as I said, it's a privilege to receive such a beautiful arc. And then I'll get myself the matching Fairy Loot edition of Stormside. I believe the sequel to Starside is called. And then we just have one extra book that we covered in this video, which is Caraval, which was scrapped in the process of shelving Human Rights. I am very sad to see this specific book leave my library because I've had it for such a long time. I've developed like an emotional attachment to it. But realistically, given my enjoyment of this book, I would rather just own this series in paperback and work through it that way. So in total, during episode 25, we have shelved 4 books and we have only scrapped 2. I feel like this could be one of the only episodes where the amount of books shelved is quite considerably bigger than the amount of books scrapped. And also generally, I'm really happy with the quality of the books that we've read in this vlog, because every single book I've read has been a 4-star. That's wild. Wow. What a time to be alive. And that means that we are ending episode 25 with 28 books in the stacks, which is exactly where we needed to be. I know that there has been a little bit of a gap between episode 24 and 25. I don't know what took me so long reading these books, if I'm being honest. I mean, the shortest of these was this, at like 400 pages. But then we then had 2 500-page books and then a 600-page book. So actually the volume of books that I've read for this singular episode is the equivalent of what I would read in like 2/3 of the month. So like what, 3 weeks? So I feel like I've covered quite a lot in this episode. I don't think that we're going to have quite so large a gap in between episode 25 and 26. And I am hoping once again to use a random number generator to select the books that I read for episode 26 as well. I really enjoyed going back to doing it that way for this episode. I've really missed the spontaneity over the last however many months it's been since I've done it, and I feel like you guys have as well. So until any particular theme calls to me that I feel like would be really interesting, for the foreseeable future, we're going to return to a more randomly generated selection of books. But I do hope you've enjoyed this vlog if you've made it this far. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.